When Russia invaded Ukraine, its forces swept into the crucial Donetsk region, seizing a vast area of territory. Although Ukraine has pushed back, Russia has maintained control over most of that region for the duration of the war, and it continues its slow, relentless advance. This is something Ukraine cannot tolerate. In a move Russia surely did not anticipate, Ukraine has targeted its own occupied land with drones in a shocking attack that left Russian occupiers in darkness. Power has been shut off across Donetsk as Ukraine sends a clear message to Russia. It is ready to take the energy conflict to the very land Russia controls. The strike on thermal power plants, Euromaidan Press reveals that the first indications of a Ukrainian strike on Donetsk surfaced in the early hours of November 18, when several of the region's occupied cities suddenly lost electricity. The reason was quickly discovered. The outlet disclosed that Ukraine executed a synchronized drone strike against its own territory, aiming for two thermal power plants that Russia had seized and was utilizing to supply heat and electricity to its soldiers and other occupying personnel. These two facilities were the Starobeshevska and Zuivska thermal power stations. Both are now engulfed in flames as a result of the Ukrainian drone attack. While details are scarce concerning the Starobeshevska plant, video evidence exists for the Zuivska attack. A 15-second clip shared by the Excelenova Plus Telegram channel and apparently filmed from a residential building shows flames erupting into the sky near the plant. A second video, also from Excelenova Plus, seems to capture the Ukrainian drone strike while it was ongoing. Not much is visible, but the sounds of Russian air defenses and drones can be clearly heard. Euromaidan Press provides further detail, reporting that post-strike information regarding Zuivska suggests Ukraine successfully achieved a direct hit on the transformer that served the plant's second boiler. That transformer is now non-operational, and the resulting power cuts across parts of Donetsk are a direct consequence of this attack. The scale of the damage. RBC Ukraine published its own report on the Ukrainian strikes on November 18, offering additional information about the two targeted power plants. According to the report, the Zuivska plant, located in the city of Zugraz, possesses an approximate capacity of 1,200 megawatts. This capacity is sufficient to supply roughly one-third of occupied Donetsk with electricity, highlighting why Ukraine chose it as a target. Even larger is the Starobeshevska plant, with a maximum capacity of 2,300 megawatts. Russia has been using this facility to stabilize its energy grid in occupied Donetsk. The repeated use of the word occupied is critical here. On the surface, the attack appears to be a counterproductive drone assault on Ukraine's own energy infrastructure. However, these facilities have been out of Ukraine's hands for an extended period, and Russia has been leveraging them to support its troops in the disputed parts of Donetsk for months, if not years. Taking these plants offline was likely a difficult choice for Ukraine, but it is a rational one. These facilities can be reconstructed later once Ukraine reclaims the territory. But in the immediate term, disabling them was necessary to inflict the maximum possible disruption on the Russian occupiers. Limited information and Russian confirmation. It should be noted that Ukraine has not yet claimed responsibility for this twin strike in Donetsk. Consequently, the majority of the information available comes from ground reports, many of which have been gathered by Euromaidan Press. The outlet claims that the initial power outages caused by the strikes affected the occupied city of Donetsk before rapidly spreading to the settlements of Ilovaisk and Makiivka, which completely lost electricity. All three locations began experiencing power loss about 30 minutes after social media accounts reported seeing Ukrainian drones over the Donetsk sky. Euromaidan Press notes that lights flickered after the Zuivska strike. But full blackouts were only reported once the Starobeshevska thermal plant was hit. This is virtually everything known about the strikes themselves. We will likely only gain more insight if Ukraine chooses to issue an official statement on the November 18 attacks. Interestingly, the Russian occupiers are providing more details than Ukraine. The Moscow Times reports that Denis Pushilin, the Kremlin-appointed leader of occupied Donetsk, used Telegram to announce the blackouts and provide specifics on the affected regions. While declaring that an emergency plan was underway for the swift restoration of power, Pushilin acknowledged the severe effectiveness of Ukraine's drones. An unprecedented attack on the republic's power grid damaged the Zuivska and Starobeshevska thermal power plants. Power was cut off to many populated areas, causing boiler houses and filtration stations to shut down. The Putin-backed official stated in his initial post. He followed this with a second Telegram message detailing the subsequent emergency meeting and just how severely occupied Donetsk had been impacted. At the moment, 65% of consumers are without electricity, the proxy mayor reported, adding, "Unfortunately, rolling power outages are possible." The rest of Pushilin's statement, concerning a meeting he planned to hold, is less relevant here. For the Russian forces in occupied Donetsk and for any Russia-sympathetic residents, these strikes should not have occurred. Russia is expected to be capable of defending the Ukrainian land it occupies. On November 18, Ukraine demonstrated Russia's failure to do so and forced it to pay a price. Beyond the 65%, further information comes from another Russian source, DNR News. It offered intriguing figures that go beyond the 65% impact reported by Putin's proxy mayor. DNR states that both thermal power plants struck by Ukraine have been fully shut down, meaning they are not even partially supplying power to the region's population. These complete closures have affected 2,399 transformer substations for 4 educational institutions, 6 boiler houses, 4 medical facility, 376,110 customers, dependent on these plants for electricity. By this point, Ukraine's precision targeting is undeniable. However, the evident question arising from this pair of drone strikes is why? The reason. A taste of Russia's own medicines mentioned. Both thermal power stations Ukraine just destroyed are in fact Ukrainian, despite being occupied by Russian forces. Ukraine's decision to sacrifice these stations has a clear rationale. It is giving Russia a dose of its own medicine. Since the autumn began, Russia has shifted the focus of its aerial attacks from generalized devastation in Ukraine's cities to specifically targeting the country's energy infrastructure. Putin's objective is straightforward: to expose Ukrainians to freezing conditions. He aims to dismantle as much of Ukraine's heating and electricity infrastructure as possible, ensuring that the winter of 2025 will be long, dark, and cold for Ukrainian citizens. This is a terror tactic, one that again targets civilians over soldiers, and which Russia has employed every year since Putin launched the invasion. However, 2025 is different. As Putin attempts to gain leverage for potential future peace negotiations with the West, Russia's air attacks on Ukraine's energy grid have escalated beyond anything previously observed in the war. For instance, the Kyiv Independent reported on one of Russia's most recent strikes on November 8. In the early hours, Russia launched one of its most extensive aerial assaults against Ukraine's energy infrastructure to date, plunging parts of Kyiv into complete darkness for about 12 hours. The scale of the attack can be judged by the number of drones Ukraine claims to have downed. Ukraine successfully destroyed 406 out of the 458 Shahed-type attack drones and decoys Russia launched, according to the Kyiv Independent. Dealing with Russia's ballistic and cruise missiles proved less successful. Only 9 of the 45 missiles that came hurtling into Ukraine that morning were shot down. Ukraine's energy minister, Svetlana Hryntchuk, suggested this strike might be the largest Russia has yet carried out against the nation's energy system. She called the incident one of the largest direct ballistic missile attacks on energy facilities since the start of the war, adding, "It's hard to remember such a number of ballistic missiles that directly attacked energy facilities." The doom loop on the same day that Ukraine executed its retaliatory strike on the Donetsk thermal plants, the Kyiv Independent published another article claiming that Russia has created a doom loop in Ukraine's energy system, which follows a 3-part cycle: destroy, fix, repeat, amid a €100 million, about $116 million corruption scandal within Ukraine's energy sector. Russia is systematically dismantling Ukraine's energy capabilities. It attacks a target, waits for Ukraine to repair it, and then strikes it again. The goal is twofold: to maximize the duration of the power outage and to force Ukraine to spend precious funds on repairs before the infrastructure is taken out once more. This strategy appears effective, at least financially. The Kyiv Independent reports that Ukraine has received roughly $1.16 billion in equipment via the Energy Community Fund from over 30 donor countries supporting Ukraine's energy infrastructure. However, DTEK, just one of Ukraine's major energy suppliers, has already spent $166 million repairing its thermal and coal facilities in 2025 alone. According to the Kyiv Independent, Ukraine's other energy providers have likely spent hundreds of millions more. Rinat Akhmetov, DTEK's owner, suggests that the repeated and massive scale of Russia's energy strikes is starting to create severe problems. The problem is time and money. I try to be optimistic. Maybe another country will modernize its energy facilities next year and give us its old equipment, Akhmetov told the Kyiv Independent. This statement highlights an underreported issue. Much of Ukraine's energy infrastructure is Soviet-era, meaning Soviet parts are required for repairs. This explains why Akhmetov anticipates modernization from countries that were once part of the Soviet Union. Ukraine needs this to happen so it can scavenge the older components necessary to keep its facilities running. The deeper Russia drives the doom cycle of energy attacks, the scarcer the supply of these Soviet-era parts becomes. Russia's strategy has also become more ruthless in 2025. During the first half of the year, Russia focused intently on Ukraine's energy sector, striking it aggressively. The Energy Community Secretariat reports that over half of Ukraine's pre-war generation capacity has been taken offline in these 6 months alone, including 70% of the thermal power plants that supply electricity to the Ukrainian people. The Kyiv Independent adds that in 2025, Russia has also turned its attention to Ukraine's domestic gas production, a sector largely untouched earlier in the war. Attacks on October 3 and October 5 alone wiped out roughly 60% of Ukraine's gas production, demonstrating the rapidly worsening energy situation in the country. Vengeance and escalation, all of this brings us back to the stated reason for Ukraine's November 18 strikes. Russia desperately needs a taste of its own tactics as it attempts to cripple Ukraine's energy sector, and Ukraine is striving to deliver an overwhelming dose in response to Russia's actions. Novaya Gazeta revealed on November 17 that Ukraine's own counterattacks on Russia's energy infrastructure are proving highly effective. Matching Russia's escalation, Ukraine's long-range drones have caused a one-third rise in Russian power outages in 2025. Specifically, Russia has experienced 34% more power outages so far in 2025 than it did throughout all of 2024, a percentage that is likely to climb as Ukraine launches more retaliatory strikes during the final month and a half of the year. The outlet also provided more specific data. From January to October 2025, 4,198 power outages were reported in Russia, a 12% increase on the 3,749 recorded during the whole of 2024, most of which were isolated cases. As might be expected, Russia is reluctant to admit when Ukrainian drones score direct hits. It attributes 15% of the blackouts to extreme weather and another 17% to scheduled maintenance. To be fair, up to 11% of outages have been officially attributed to shelling and drone strikes, according to the outlet. However, it's the 41% caused by infrastructure damage and emergency repairs, and the 16% resulting from other or unknown causes that demand attention. Russia is unwilling to specify the true cause, but the cause is already known. Ukraine is retaliating for Russia's energy infrastructure strikes with similar attacks, and Russia is beginning to feel the very pain Putin wishes to inflict on Ukraine. November 18 simply provided two additional examples of a Ukrainian campaign that has been ongoing since early 2025, with the added element that Ukraine destroyed two of its own thermal power plants in the Russian-occupied area of Donetsk. The tactical advantage: there is a strategic reason for this beyond merely plunging the Russian occupiers into darkness. An occupied Donetsk without power is an occupied Donetsk from which Russia will struggle to launch attacks into other areas of the region. Donetsk is quickly approaching its coldest part of the year, as the Moscow Times noted in its report on the thermal plant strikes. The city of Donetsk, one of the settlements affected by the Ukrainian-caused power cuts, was expected to reach temperatures of just $46. .circ text F dollar on November 18 and likely hit a low of $44 circ text F dollar on November 19. These temperatures are not freezing, but they are far from comfortable for a Russian occupying army that assumed it was safe from attacks on energy infrastructure because those facilities were on Ukrainian soil. RBC Ukraine adds that the broader goal of Ukraine's energy infrastructure attacks, which coincide with an increase in attacks on Russian oil refineries, is to significantly reduce the effectiveness of Russia's ground forces. Fuel logistics and availability inside Russia and its occupied territories are already strained by these strikes, making the loss of power at this juncture particularly ill-timed for Russia's forces. As Putin tries to organize a final autumn push deeper into Donetsk before the freezing cold takes hold, his commanders are literally attempting to execute these plans in cold and dark conditions. This does not bode well for Russia's chances of success. Of course, Putin will not do something as logical as postponing Russia's assaults due to the power cuts caused by Ukraine. The attacks will proceed, with Russia's disorganized troops being neutralized by Ukraine, For Putin, this at least means his soldiers are absorbing some Ukrainian ammunition, which is better than nothing. Ukraine, for its part, will welcome any attacks that slow down or weaken Russia's assaults. As The Independent pointed out in October, Russia currently controls approximately 75% of Donetsk and has been achieving marginal territorial gains throughout the year. Putin wants complete control of Donetsk, partly because it has been a goal since Russia initiated its campaign of aggression against Ukraine in 2014, and partly because total control would give Putin leverage in peace talks. If Russia controls Donetsk, Putin can demand the region be ceded as part of any peace settlement. Ukraine cannot permit this. Its strikes on its own energy infrastructure in occupied Donetsk are part of a strategy to prevent full Russian control. Russia is also pressing hard to capture the vital city of Pokrovsk, Ukraine's most critical logistics hub in Donetsk, which has been under Russian assault for around 18 months. The push for Pokrovsk has already resulted in heavy Russian casualties, with Putin attempting to take the territory at the cost of over 100,000 of his soldiers. You can learn more about the extent of Russia's losses in our video. Ukraine hopes that targeting energy infrastructure in occupied Donetsk will further diminish Russia's assaults on Pokrovsk, potentially leading to more Russian losses and keeping the city under Ukrainian control at least until the close of 2025. An unconventional warfare tactic ultimately, Ukraine's dual strike in Donetsk confirms a realization. The most effective way to counter Russia's energy attacks is by conducting similar strikes of its own. President Volodymyr Zelensky articulated this as far back as October 9, following another Russian attack on Ukraine's energy system. At that time, Ukraine's president warned that the Russian border region of Belgorod would become a target if Russia did not stop its infrastructure attacks. We have not changed our position. One of the most intensive directions from which Ukraine is being hit is the Belgorod direction. UNN quoted Zelensky as saying, "We told them that they should understand that if they want to cause blackouts for us, we will do the same. There are no secrets here. The enemy must feel the price of this war. But we do not kill civilians. Our troops only launch pinpoint strikes exactly where the task is set." Perhaps Ukraine has now expanded its scope to Donetsk, as evidenced by its most recent strikes. If so, it is a logical decision. Russia uses the territories it occupies to launch glide bombs and drones into the rest of Ukraine. It is therefore probable that the parts of Donetsk Ukraine just plunged into darkness are the same areas from which Russian missiles and drones have launched previously. Now that two of the region's thermal power plants have been disabled, those aerial strikes may be affected just as much as Russia's ground strategy in Donetsk. One thing is certain, Ukraine has demonstrated to Putin its willingness to strike at its own interests if it means inflicting greater pain on the Russian occupiers. Ironically, Putin is also harming Russia, although his callous attacks affect his own army, not Ukraine. In Pokrovsk, Putin has been abandoning his troops to die, leaving Russia's injured soldiers to fend for themselves while executing anyone who refuses to obey his reckless commands. Find out more, including a story from one of Russia's abandoned soldiers, in our next video. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more updates on developments in the Donetsk region.